Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 215, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, January 24th, 2024. We are just motoring through this first month of the year. I can't believe it is already the 24th of January. Wow, that was surprising to read that up at the top. Hope you all are having a great week. Weather has still been a little, not so bad during the day when the sun's out, but it gets pretty chilly at night. But it sounds like we may have some spring-like weather coming. Obviously, I'm not used to that. It's unseasonable this time of year, but I did see one forecast where it's going to stay kind of warm. So we'll see what happens there. Not a lot to talk about before getting into the news here. One thing I did not mention on the last podcast was a bit of national news. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has officially dropped out of the race in the Republican primary for president. That means it is now just Donald Trump, who is in all likelihood going to be the nominee, and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, where as of this recording is still in the race. We'll see how her performance goes in New Hampshire, if she decides to continue or not through South Carolina. But it might not be too much longer, and this whole thing's going to be done pretty darn early, which I don't think is super surprising, which will mean in all likelihood we'll see a Trump-Biden rematch, which I know everyone is just thrilled with. So that was really the only piece of big national news as it relates to this election year that happened at the last podcast. So enough about that. Let's go local. Let's dive in locally now, and let's talk about what's going on here in the Holy City. The dysfunction with the Charleston County School Board continues. On one hand, part of me is glad about this story, but then I also see the negative side to it. And what am I talking about? Well, as you know, Charleston County schools have been without a permanent superintendent since this past September. And then on Monday night, the school board made an offer to hire Anita Huggins permanently. So part of me is like, okay, great. They're finally going to have a permanent superintendent. It's not going to be this whole long drawn out process. But then on the other side of things, that means they're not really doing a full search again. So it brings up a lot of questions. So for those who don't remember, former superintendent Dr. Eric Gallion was officially released from his contract. You can go back and listen to old podcasts or look up news stories about all the drama related to that. But when that happened, Huggins was appointed as the district's interim leader back on October 27th. She's been serving the district as the acting superintendent for these last few months. And now the board has voted to offer her a 3-year contract without going through a traditional search process, which again, on the one hand, just like, oh, finally, assuming Huggins accepts this, they'll have a superintendent. Let's move forward and get down to business of actually helping the schools. But on the other hand, should we just be hiring someone without conducting another search? Granted, they did a search not that long ago, and so it'd be a lot of money would be put towards it. And so it's not an easy answer. It's nice to have potentially someone in that role permanently, but you wonder, did they rush into this? So the motion was made by board chair. It's actually a new board chair with this new year, Keith Grabowski, and the vote passed 5-4. You are already seeing where this is going. Anytime there's a 5-4 vote with this board, it tends to be the monster liberty-backed candidates voting together. They have the majority. They tend to do whatever the heck they want, and it appears that's what happened here. So the 4 board members who voted in opposition said they were not necessarily doing so because they have any problems with Huggins, but more so that they were blindsided by the motion. Those board members are Darlene Roberson, Courtney Waters, Darren Lee Calhoun II, and Dr. Carol Temple. So they all voted against it. They said, again, they don't necessarily disagree with Huggins ultimately getting the role, but they disagree with the board skipping the necessary search process to hire her. All this might be a moot point, as Huggins still has to accept the offer before she is officially made superintendent. There has been no clear answer or signal of what she may do with this. It was a 3-year contract. Outside of that, the terms aren't really known. Some of the board members apologize, to her because previously those Moms for Liberty back candidates didn't have really nice things to say about her and didn't think she was really fit to be in the role. But now they're saying she is. They sprung this vote without telling the other four board members. This is a common practice that the Moms for Liberty back candidates like to do. Or at least it seems that way, because this is not the first time the other four board members have just been completely blindsided by a pretty significant, discussion or motion that's been brought to the table. It's just not the right way to do business. And again, this is what happens when you have people who ran on one issue or multiple issues, but all falling under the umbrella of culture wars and don't actually have an interest in improving the schools or doing things the way they should be done. So although there's nothing technically wrong or against state law or anything like that with what they did, it's just not the way that the board should operate. You don't say, "Hey, we're going to decide if we're going to hire a superintendent, the today, and we're going to offer them a 3-year contract. So, let's go ahead and vote on that," and not tell the other four board members. Like it's wild, and just another example of the dysfunction of this group, and how they're not serious about legislating. They don't know how to, and it continually rears its head. Seemingly every meeting with this group. After the January 6th, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, you may remember, although only just a couple years ago, sometimes it seems like another lifetime ago. But you may remember after those attacks, Representative Nancy Mace, 1st District representative here, she had just been sworn in as a freshman lawmaker, fresh off her victory over Joe Cunningham. She went on TV and criticized Donald Trump for his role in the day's events. She said that his accomplishments in office were, quote, wiped out in just a few short hours, end quote. At the time, a lot of people were somewhat surprised that a Republican would call out Donald Trump. That seemed to be career suicide previous to the attack on January 6th. But we did see several come out and speak out against him. And Nancy Mace was one of them, which led credence to her claim that she was going to be a more moderate representative. Just because she had an R next to her name, she was not going to always vote with Republicans. She's going to, be more middle of the road. She's not an extremist. And it seemed in that moment, hey, maybe she was telling the truth. As a freshman lawmaker, could have been, like I said, really damaging for her political career to speak out against Trump. But maybe perhaps, because others were doing it, she didn't really think too much about it. Regardless, it was somewhat refreshing to see someone like her making comments like that. And she made some others in the days that followed that were similar. Trump responded by calling Mace, quote, an absolutely terrible candidate, unquote, and had some other choice words for her, and then even decided to endorse a candidate who was a primary challenger for Nancy Mace when that came up. At her next election, Katie Arrington was that choice. She was a hardcore Trump supporter from day one. Trump endorsed her. So obviously there was some bad blood there. And while Trump, that is, was giving, his famous complete and total endorsement of Katie Arrington, there was a pre-primary rally in South Carolina where Trump called Mace crazy and a terrible person. I mean, just obviously this was typical of Trump and someone who comes out and speaks out against him or doesn't support him. That's no surprise. And, although Mace made that cringy video on Twitter, you may remember of her outside of one of the Trump towers in New York, Trump hotels in New York City. It seemed like, this is a done deal. They don't like each other. There's been a lot of speculation and talk that Nancy Mace never really liked Trump, but was just kind of playing along with the party, but behind closed doors really despised the guy. And so you would imagine, especially with two South Carolina politicians in the Republican primary for president, that perhaps she would have voice support and endorse someone like Senator Tim Scott or former Governor Nikki Haley. I mean, come on. A candidate called you crazy, called you a terrible person, said that you were a terrible candidate, and has nothing nice to say about you. You said that presidential nominee, um, needed to take some blame and be held accountable for the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. You should see where this is going, right? Of course she endorsed Donald Trump. Of course she did. Not unlike Ron DeSantis, who the former president, Donald Trump, said, basically alluded that maybe Ron DeSantis was grooming high schoolers and partying with them. That's just one of the many things he said about Ron DeSantis. It echoes Ted Cruz in 2016, where Trump attacked his wife's looks, made some weird claim that Cruz's dad may have been involved in the JFK assassination. I mean, we've seen this all the time where Trump just roasts somebody, says some of the most awful things about them, their family, and they all bend the knee in the end. Just cowardice all around. So yes, Mace this week, back to former president. She had stayed out of this Republican primary despite those two South Carolinians being in the race. But then yes, on Monday, a day ahead of the New Hampshire primary taking place, when you hear this yesterday, Tuesday, January 23rd, decided that she was going to endorse Trump over Haley, despite Haley again being from South Carolina, living in Mace's congressional district, and the fact that Haley supported Nancy Mace in 2022 against Katie Arrington. So when Trump was attacking Mace, Haley stepped in because Katie Arrington was a little bit too far right, and she wanted to be more with the moderate Nancy Mace, even though those two don't have the best history. And how does Mace thank her? Backing Donald Trump. I mean, just classic, again, just cowardice, predictable, whatever other word you can think of. And look, I get it to some extent. Trump's getting the nomination. He's going to get it. Does it really benefit you politically, especially when you live in a blood red state like South Carolina, to go against Trump? No, it doesn't. But at the same time, you didn't have to make that endorsement at all. And you could have easily gone with the person who supported you, who is from your state, and doesn't have the current baggage that Donald Trump brings to the table. But Nancy Mace doesn't make decisions based on what her constituents want or what's right. It's what's best for her and her future. Some more politics, but this is we're going to talk about the state house now, so not so much national. There are some renewed conversations and legislation surrounding abortion in South Carolina. I know what you're thinking. Wait, didn't South Carolina already put into place one of the most restrictive bans, essentially an all-out ban on abortions in the state? Yes. So why is there new legislation? Well, no surprise. One piece of legislation is trying to make up for this change and provide benefits for people who are affected by it. And of course, there's the other side where someone wants to make it even more restrictive. So as I said, yes, the state already has a 6-week ban, but a bill known as the Equal Protection Bill, which is sponsored by Berkeley County Republican Representative Jordan Pace, would look to make abortion, yes, illegal still, and with limited exceptions. So he is trying to remove some of those exceptions that were in the current legislation. Specifically, cases of rape and incest would no longer be an acceptable reason to get an abortion. So the only exception in Pace's bill would be the life of the mother. Surprising that even that was in there. His reasoning for removing cases of rape and incest was essentially saying he felt that, obviously he believes that life begins at conception, doesn't want there to be any abortions, period, and that it's not the child's fault, that they are a result of rape or incest, and so why should they be punished by, being aborted? That's his thought process there. Now, one thing I will say, obviously, if you listen to this podcast, I don't agree with not having those exceptions, and I don't agree with a lot of the current legislation either, of course, but just given this conversation, that's a no-brainer. I don't agree with that. But one thing that I was happy, I guess, for lack of a better word, to see is that Pace said he is also pushing for stricter penalties for rapists and those who commit assault. Hey, I'm all on board on that. That's great. Let's absolutely do that. The rest of this is garbage, but I mean, at least he's trying to put something worthwhile in there. So there's that bill. Meanwhile, there's a bill from independent Senator Mia McLeod. She used to be a Democrat, kind of had a falling out with them after the last election, felt like she didn't get the proper support from the state party, so she's now an independent. She has a bill called the South Carolina Pro-Birth Accountability Act. She said this bill is intended to provide financial support to women who may have gotten an abortion were it not for the current 6-week ban. McLeod said, quote, "Put your money where your mouth is. There are so many things that we have to be concerned about after a child is born. To prioritize a fetus, the men in particular, the Republican men in our male-dominated legislature, are only looking at forcing women and girls to give birth. That's not fair. It's not right. And there's so many variables," end quote. So her bill lists several healthcare related costs, including psychological, psychiatric, nurse visits, and much more would all be covered under this motion, under this legislation. The bill also lists other expenses, including the cost of living, child support, health, dental, and vision insurance until the child turns 18, and fully funded South Carolina, a college saving plan, basically, if they go. Uh, I believe the legislation is to a local or to a state college. I'll have more details on that once I can look at the legislation, but there's some form of college saving plan in there. This is something we've talked about before. Look, if you're going to pass this bill, it's not good enough to just pass it and that's the end of it. If you're going to put up legislation with a 6-week abortion ban, which again is essentially an alt-right ban, since many people don't even know they're pregnant at that time, you need to be doing more for these, children that are going to be born into this state because you're forcing the mothers to give birth. You need to be doing something for those children because, number one, we're already doing a very poor job in many aspects in the state when it comes to protecting women and children. And so you're just going to add more children to that mix and not do anything to support them and help them, and definitely not support the mothers because they're already doing a horrible job at that. So there needs to be some things put in place to help out these people who may have gotten an abortion if not for this new ban. So we've talked about that before. I'm glad that someone is actually trying to do that. I already know where this is going to go as far as the arguments. You're going to hear people saying we don't do handouts. Government shouldn't be helping people, the typical arguments you hear anytime legislation is introduced that's going to try to help some folks who may be struggling or may need some assistance. But who knows? Perhaps at least some of this stuff, if not every aspect of it, will get passed. But like I said, if you really truly care about the children, you have to care about them after they're born, and the state hasn't done a very good job of that. So hopefully, again, who knows? It would be nice to see at least some of this legislation get passed. We'll see what the debate is. Right now, the priority, as we've talked about, is anti-trans legislation. They haven't even gotten to really anything else of much interest at this point. But I'm sure the PACE bill will certainly get some attention, as there's plenty of people in the House that wanted the abortion ban to be even stricter than it currently is. So hopefully they'll both get equal chance if that is the case, and I'll be sure to keep you posted. And last story, some future smoke and vape shops may have to follow distance requirements within the city of Charleston. At Tuesday's meeting, so last night's meeting, and I'm recording this on Tuesday, so I don't have an update for you, but I will on future podcasts if they do indeed bring it up. But the city council is supposed to be considering an amendment that would require a 500-foot distance between tobacco and vape shops and places like schools, parks, churches, residential areas, and other businesses of that kind. The plan was originally presented to the Community Development Committee this past Thursday, and the amendment is set to have a public hearing at Tuesday's City Council meeting. Again, that's the day I'm recording this. When you're hearing this, you may already know what happened there, but I'll be sure to keep you posted. Now, the new rule wouldn't apply to existing shops, only new ones. That was my first question was, what about businesses especially since a lot of these vape shops are pretty new in this area. You all probably over the last, 3-4 years have noticed this explosion of smoke shops, vape shops, especially after South Carolina was allowing some farmers to grow hemp in this state, although that's even become a kind of a mess as well. But a lot of them popped up here, and I think a lot of them are hoping that somewhere down the line, cannabis will be legalized either on the national level or South Carolina will legalize it in some fashion. They're hoping to get in the market before that happens. Good luck with that. But in any event, I was curious if some of these shops are going to be moved, but the answer is no. It would only apply to any new ones looking to come to the area. Currently, if you're wondering, you have to be 21 or over to even go into the vape shop. So it's interesting that they're adding this extra layer. The schools thing I sort of get, even though, again, you have to be 21 and no one that is going to school is 21 years old unless they've stayed back several years. But in any event, if they're 21, they would be allowed to go in. But it's interesting that it's also including parks, churches, just general residential areas. It seems like they would have a hard time opening in really a lot of places. So just an interesting piece of legislation that is, like I said, is coming up at the city council meeting. I'll let you know what happens as far as that. And that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please rate and review, subscribe, all that good stuff. I really appreciate it. You can also support the website and the podcast by going to patreon.com/Holy City Center and nominating Holy City Center or Holy City Center Radio in the Best of Charleston Awards in the city paper. The last day to nominate is the 25th, so don't sleep on that. Please, if you've been thinking about it, but have it on your to-do list. If you have a chance, go ahead and do that. I would really, really appreciate it. I also want to say that I appreciate Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System, who produces each and every episode, and also Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show as well. Hope you have a great rest of your week. I will talk to you again on Friday. Until then, good night and good luck.